Valve just released a SteamOS beta that you might want to upgrade to because it includes a fix for an issue that I know a lot of you have been having because you messaged me about it and I have been having it as well. After that, we got to talk about how Valve just basically fixed one of the biggest problems with early access releases on Steam. And finally, I highly recommend you download the Monster Hunter Stories 3 demo on Steam Deck. That one took me a few tries to get, but we nailed it. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about Steam hardware. I hope you had a great weekend playing a ton of video games. I decided to go back to Chronos the New Dawn. The story in this game is like crazy. I don't really understand what's going on at all, but it really does nail that classic Dead Space / Resident Evil third-person shooter vibe. Once you get some upgrades and increase the charge time on the pistol, it's basically the best weapon in the game. I like the shotgun. I've unlocked a few weapons so far, but that first starting pistol, the sword I think it's called, excellent. No notes, Bloober team. They do have a native Steam Deck version of this game. I would recommend the Proton release because it runs better, but yeah, it's an Unreal Engine 5 game that actually works on Steam Deck, so you should probably pick it up, especially if you're into survival horror. Also, it would really help me out if you subscribe to the channel and set your notifications to all. Thank you so much for all the subscriptions lately, but with the intro out of the way, let's get into the first news story here and talk about this Steam Deck beta. So a new bug that's been introduced in SteamOS is affecting me because I have over 1,000 games, which I don't know if that's something to brag about or something to be really disappointed in myself over, but I feel like this channel is the safest place possible to admit that I have over 1,000 Steam games in my library. And I also went and checked my friends list because I've added so many of you guys, and it looks like I'm in a minority in the sense that a lot of you guys have well over 1,000 Steam games. So this issue has probably affected you, where when you go to use a Proton version of a game, so like playing any game on the Steam Deck, because how many games have native Linux builds these days? Not that many. You would get an error that says the device is not supported. Someone actually messaged me about this. They were getting this issue with Half-Life 2 trying to play the Proton version. It looked like they set a global Proton for their entire SteamOS on their Steam Deck and it was causing issues there. So if you've been having an issue where you have over 1,000 Steam games in your Steam profile, just upgrade to the latest Steam Deck beta. And if you really don't like using the beta, just switch it back once this goes into stable release. If you can handle waiting, like you have less than 1,000 games or you just haven't been seeing this issue all that much, you could wait for them to push it into stable because, you know, it doesn't really take that long. They've really took a piecemeal sort of way to release these betas lately. Like back when the Steam Deck came out, they would get a bunch of fixes all together and release a huge beta, then test it for like 3 or 4 months and then release it as a big numbered upgrade. Lately with SteamOS, probably because they're getting ready for Steam hardware like the Steam Frame and the Steam Machine, once they have a fix ready to go, they put it in beta and within a week it's usually unstable. So whatever route you want to take, if you're having this issue, it is fixed on beta and it's going to be fixed in the stable release, so that's good. The next thing they did is fix the Nintendo Switch 1 Pro controller. I know it's a Nintendo controller and a lot of people probably don't have it, but if you value battery life and you just want a good generic controller for Steam Deck or the Steam Machine or anything that it'll connect to like a regular PC, you can't do better than this. The standby time on the Nintendo Switch 1 Pro controller has to be studied in a lab. Like once humanity disappears, they're going to find these controllers in the desert like an artifact. They're going to hit the home button on it and that little light on top is going to flash because the battery life, even when you're using it, is absolutely insane on the Switch Pro controller and even the Switch 2 one, but you have to use that wired with the Steam Deck. So like not necessarily the best option when it comes to controllers. Because we're talking about betas, I will point out that something got screwed up with my beloved 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless controller. I don't know why this happened, but it has an issue now where the glyphs don't show correctly and the back buttons don't work. Valve, you need to fix this. This is the best controller. I know a lot of people have bought it because I recommended it, and just for some reason, the second a lot of people actually bought it because I recommended it in a video about using the Steam Deck docked, that's when it breaks. You're doing me that dirty. Fix that controller. That better be in the next damn beta. I swear to God, guys, like they need to fix that controller because I've been using it a lot for Chronos the New Dawn and RoboCop Rogue City, the DLC. I forgot what it's called. Unfinished Business. That's the standalone DLC they just released. That is awesome if you didn't play it. And then finally, there's a new fix for gyro. I gotta be real. When I read technical terms about gyro, my eyes glaze over because like I understand the basics of how it works. There's an accelerometer in there. You hold your thumbs on the sticks. It uses that as the center point. You can control the camera with it. Awesome. When they talk about technical terms like axis and center point and circular degree versus spherical, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. But if you've had an issue with gyro joystick aiming, they've allegedly fixed that on the Steam Deck and pretty much every other controller. So you should be happy to know that it's fixed. So that's a pretty good beta update. The one thing I'm crossing my fingers for before Steam Machine is that they upgrade the driver to the newest Mesa. Like, they're getting better about their cadence of catching up with Mesa, but the latest Mesa driver comes along with a huge ray tracing fix for newer AMD cards that makes it actually usable. Like, my 9070 XT somehow has better capabilities for ray tracing than I'm getting on SteamOS. I have a dual boot install by accident with Bazite, and ray tracing works so much better with that new Mesa driver. So I hope we actually get that soon. But like, as far as wishlist features go, they're really good at keeping up with it. So that's the one thing I'm crossing my fingers for. And of course, fixing the damn 8-bit do controller. Please, Valve, fix the controller. I'm begging you. But that brings me to the second news story, which is that Valve just basically fixed my biggest problem with early access releases. So like, overall, I think for specific games, early access makes a lot of sense, right? Like, if you've got a lot of systems, you've got a lot of features, you want to fine tune it, or at least strip out features that people aren't engaging with and really perfect your game. Other times there are games that go into early access that are single player, and I'm like, I don't really understand why you had to do this early access. Baldur's Gate 3, I know I'm going to catch a lot of hate for that. I don't like the way that Larian does this, where they, introduce early access for Act 1. They fine tune the absolute hell out of it. Then Act 2 is a little less optimized, but like, mostly on par with Act 1. And then Act 3 is just a huge disaster, and it like performs worse, and it's the pivotal point of the game, and it gets the least development time, but they're like sick of working on it, so they push it out the door. There are a lot of games that follow that structure, like Tainted Grail, Fall of Avalon. That's another one where Act 1 super optimized, Act 2 less optimized, Act 3 runs like hot garbage on every device out there, and then the developers disappear. So early access makes sense for some games, doesn't make sense for others. But one big issue with it is that when games come out in early access, you really have no idea how long the early access is supposed to take. If you ever go to that section where they specifically asked how long the devs think it'll be, they're like, I don't know, it could be a year, it could be 5, who knows? But then sometimes there are devs who really have it locked down, and they're like, oh, Tokyo Extreme Racers developers, Genki, they're like, okay, this game is like 80% done, we haven't made one of these in a while, we want to release it in its current state, get some feedback from the fans, implement that, and do a 1.0 release. Like, that game was in early access for less than a year, and that was a great system. So like, for someone like them, it would be really smart for them to be able to put a planned release date even though they're in early access, and Valve just introduced that feature. Obviously, my first thought was like, how could this be abused? And it's easy to figure out how. Like, a developer who wants to do a pump and dump scheme, like they release an unfinished game, they collect a bunch of money, and then they disappear. They could put a firm release date in that slot and make people think that this game is farther along than it is, and that it's going to get a committed development cycle, and then bam, they just disappear overnight. So Valve is going the extra mile and really encouraging developers to only use this feature if they're positive they're going to hit that release date. So like a game like Tokyo Extreme Racer, that would be a perfect example of a game to take advantage of this, because like I mentioned, it was basically done when they released it, and then they just added a couple of things for launch and changed things based on feedback. That's a game that should have its official release date from the time it enters early access. Something like Divinity or Baldur's Gate 3 or Tainted Grail, Fall of Avalon, that should not use that feature, because how many times have we seen this where you get a game like that, they introduce a really strong Act 1, they get through Act 2, and then they just rush through Act 3 because they're running out of money and they have no way to get venture capital, especially now with how game development is. So they just rush through the third act, release the games, and watch the overwhelmingly positive reviews go to mixed or overwhelmingly negative overnight. That happens more often than not. So hopefully Valve has some sort of policing in place, because even though they're encouraging developers not to use this feature if they don't have a firm release date locked in, I mean, developers are going to do that, right? Like, they want the money at the end of the day. I know there's developers out there who are in it for the sake of the art. They don't tend to sell a lot of games outside of huge outliers that explode, like, I don't know, Hollow Knight or Silksong or something like that, or Ball X Pit. Other than those, there are so many games that, just come out in early access, never get finished, and then magically there's a 1.0 release and the developer disappears with all the money. So anything that Valve can do to stop that from happening, I think they critically need to do that, because we've seen what happens when they have their hands-off approach on something like this with the verification system, which I don't know if you've seen this, but Borderlands 4, which just had its Switch 2 port canceled, is now verified on Steam Deck. And if you haven't played Borderlands 4 on a beefy PC or even a Steam Deck, it doesn't run well at all. Like on the Steam Deck, you're averaging 21 to 27 FPS. There's no reality in which that game should be verified. That's like a straight up abuse of the verification system. And the crazy thing is, Valve has to manually approve every game that applies for verification. So they looked at Borderlands 4 and were like, yeah, that's a decent experience on the Steam Deck because it meets our arbitrary rules of like the text is legible when you're running at like 24 FPS at the absolute dog shit lowest settings with FSR cranked to ultra performance. And I think the only reason they cleared the bar is because they'll say, oh, introduce frame generation and go from 20 to 40 FPS and get 5 seconds of input lag. Great fix, guys. That's awesome. So yeah, overall, I think this feature where you can put a planned release date is a net win. It obviously has a lot of opportunity to go catastrophically wrong, but you know, Valve, I'm happy to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they are a company that learns from mistakes. So I'm sure they're looking at the situation they've entered with the verification program and they're like, okay, we got to police this a little bit. But yeah, either way, if you see a game in early access, do your due diligence, like do some research, make sure it's something that's worth investing in, because like there are so many games like the ones I just mentioned where the developers just up and disappear out of nowhere and then you don't get your money back. Like you can request a refund, but a lot of the time you won't get it if you've had the game for a while and put some hours into it, and that's just a crappy situation overall. And finally, for the quick wrap-up news story in today's video, I want to recommend a demo on the Steam Deck because there's a ton of content in it and it runs shockingly well. The demo is Monster Hunter Stories 3. If you're someone like me who grew up in the 90s, you probably grew up with Pokemon games like Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Silver, and Gold, and maybe Ruby and Sapphire is like the golden era of Pokemon for you. And ever since then, you might also be like me in the sense that you've bought every Pokemon game and there's been a sliding scale of disappointment with each new release where there's like extremely minor upgrades overall, and it's really just a series that they pump out because of people like me who show up and buy it day one. I have broken the curse with stuff like ZA, I think was the new one, Pokemon Legends ZA, and I didn't buy Scarlet and Violet until it was less than $30. Like I was just not about buying those games. I will not be buying the new Pokemon game because they've just completely ruined that series in my opinion. So other developers like Capcom have caught on to this, and they've basically taken Monster Hunter and turned it into like a mix of Dragon Quest and Pokemon. If you played Dragon Quest Joker back in the day, it's a very similar series to that. And honestly, I liked Monster Hunter Stories 2 a lot. I think I'm going to give it a replay because this demo is phenomenal. I think it's really good they did a demo because the big difference between this one and the last two is that the last two were definitely oriented towards kids, and this one is more oriented towards like more, not necessarily adults, but more older people, I would say. Like it's targeting that Metaphor Refantasio / Persona age range, but not getting quite that mature. Just basically like, you know, older people can play it and enjoy it and younger people can too. And having monsters from Monster Hunter be Pokemon is just the smartest thing that Capcom's ever done. They have a whole egg laying system where you can mix and match monsters to get their stats improved. Overall, really cool idea for a game. And the reason I'm recommending it for Steam Deck is because it runs really well. You can set it to its high settings and then set FSR to balanced and you'll get a locked 30 FPS. This is not a game you need 60 FPS in at all. I'm pretty sure it'll target 30 FPS on everything because it's a turn-based combat Pokemon style game. Like it's an RPG at the end of the day. It's not like Doom, the Dark Ages or something like that. So I feel like 30 FPS is more than fine. And like I mentioned, I think it's really smart that they released a demo because Monster Hunter Wilds was non-functional on PC for the better part of a year. They've gotten it to a decent state, I would say. A lot of people are claiming it's playable or enjoyable on the Steam Deck in its state now. I think it still needs a couple more patches. Like we are so close to being able to run it at 30 FPS, but like I think the bar should be a little bit higher for that game than the absolute lowest settings it can go at 30 FPS. Like let's get to medium 30 locked before we start saying it's a good experience, so Capcom actually understands that they can't release games in that state going forward. I feel okay recommending this game, and there's actually a lot of content in the demo, and as far as I can tell, you'll be able to transfer your save when the full game comes out. So if you're like me and you grew up with Pokemon and you've reckoned with the fact that you have extreme grief for how poorly they've treated that series and you want something new that kind of captures the same flavor but also does its own thing, I highly recommend playing this demo, or maybe even picking up Monster Hunter Stories 2, because while the first one was for 3DS and really shows its age in its port over to PC, 2 was like the start of the series for me, and I really have a lot of fun playing that game still to this day. So I'm recommending it on the Steam Deck for everyone who's watching this channel. So yeah, that about wraps up the video. Just a quick check-in on what I've got going on. I'm waiting for more information on the Steam Machine, of course, like everyone else. The Super Bowl was okay. I mean, the game kind of sucked, but the trailers were pretty decent. I'm wearing my Rick Dalton shirt today. It's like a Rick Dalton Film Festival shirt with all of his fake movies, because they showed the trailer for the continuing adventures of Cliff Booth. Netflix, up until recently, has been incapable of making a watchable movie, but I just watched The Rip from Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. It was awesome. Like, I would have loved to see that in theaters, and having the combo of David Fincher and Quentin Tarantino, Fincher directing, Tarantino writing, I feel like it's going to go pretty well, and that trailer looked really good. My one complaint is that even though they put the film filter over it and everything, it still has that dark digital look, and like the whole vibe of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that I really liked was the color grading and how bright and well lit everything was. So hopefully they do another pass on that, and hopefully we don't have to wait long for it, because also, in addition to not revealing the title, they just said coming soon, which is bizarre because that movie's been done for a little while now, if I remember correctly. As always, guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.